of the China and Europe.
I'm Diana from Boston.
We are asked to start this morning's session by yesterday's session. Okay. But this beautiful conference hall, compared with yesterday, much better, center of Tokyo. This is really the contribution of the government of Japan. They provide these excellent facilities for this meeting. So I'd like to express our thanks to them. And also, before going to the reflection of yesterday, as you may all aware, yesterday there was a terrible bomb attack in Colombo, Sri Lanka. And so on behalf of all participants of this C20 meetings, we'd like to express our deepest condolences to the victim of this attack. Saying this, now I'd like to reflect yesterday. And yesterday we had the opening session by the chair of the C20, Ms. Yuka. And she welcomed all of you. And then she also mentioned yesterday's Tokyo Democracy Forum was a part of this C20 meeting. Indeed, so today is the day 2 of the C20 meeting, as you are aware. Then we have 3 distinguished guest speakers, namely Mr. Tsuji, Parliamentary Minister of Foreign Affairs from the government of Japan, and also Vice President of the JICA, Mr. Kato, and also Vice President of TOICA, Mr. Son. And all of them congratulated the opening of the Tokyo Democracy Forum and C20 meetings. And I noticed there are some common points all of them mentioned. First of all, they reconfirmed their commitment to the SDGs, and especially SDG 16. So that is a wonderful thing. All of them confirm the importance of peace, democracy, human rights, and sustainable development. And secondly, also all of them emphasize the importance of the collaboration between government agencies and civil societies. So that means importance of the partnership between C20 and G20s. So that is also confirmed yesterday. Then finally, third point I noticed, that is, they also mentioned the importance of the collaboration among member countries. That means networking among ourselves. That is very important. So partnership and also networking are confirmed. Then after that, we had plenary session and also thematic sessions. A summary of this point, I'd like to ask Diana to mention this.
Thank you, Ken. We wanted to share some reflections on what has been the discussion on day 2, especially for those who are joining us today for the first time. Between the plenaries and the breakout sessions, we have 7 breakout sessions where we discuss civic space, inclusive democracy, corruption, illicit final flows, financial constraints for CSOs, science and technology, violence against children, among other issues. There were very interesting and powerful insights from all of them. We can highlight some of them to share with you. We highlight the importance, as Ken mentioned, of collaboration between multiple stakeholders to achieve what is the 2030 agenda. Also, we reaffirm the necessity that the G20 must be an inclusive G20 and have people at the center of it. Also, the importance of democracy as the pioneer and one of the prerequisites of achieving the SDGs and the agenda, development agenda. Also, we were very concerned to see some of the figures about civic space for NGOs in the world, we could get to know that only 4% of the population live in countries where civic space is being respected, and we also get to know that 111 countries our civic space is being under attack. We also are very concerned about the increasing censorship and intimidation of the press that is taking place in some countries. Also, we emphasize the importance of us, civil society, listening to people's needs and listening to people's voice. Also, the importance of breaking discriminatory systems, especially at the community level, in order to get changes in social attitudes, and also the importance of building capacity for CSO, especially also starting at the community level and in the grassroots, in order to strengthen our impact. Also, in order to get solutions to all of the problems that we have been discussing, we also highlight the importance of combining both local and global levels. We also highlight the importance of starting looking for solutions at the community level, at the local level, and also the importance of not working and not being isolated. We highlight the importance of working in groups, in communities, at the collective way, and in networks, because together we can achieve much more. So these are at least most of the highlights of what we have been discussed and seen yesterday.
Thank you. So after these breakdown sessions, we back to the plenary, and as Liana mentioned, each session moderator reported. Then after that, finally, we adopted C20 Tokyo Democracy Forum declarations. So that is included in almost the beginning of this policy paper. That means orange cover. I think everybody has. And that one I would like to introduce. So yesterday, over 400 people all over the world, that means Asia, Africa, Latin America, European countries, all of them gathered, and in front of them, this declaration was read. And briefly, I'd like to summarize the main point. That means first page is about preamble. That is reaffirming the importance of the 2030 agenda for sustainable development. Particularly, it is affirmed the importance of the phrase of the no one will leave them behind. Then, after that, also we in this declaration expressed concern about increasing restriction of the civic space and human rights and all other points were expressed in this prayer. Then, based on this, second page listed 8 recommendations from us. That means first, implement all previous current recommendations which we adopted in previous forums. Then, secondly, also we strongly recommended review this SDG 16 on an annual basis together with SDG 17. This year we have a high-level forum that will review. But usually SDG 16 is not reviewed every year, only that SDG 17. So we recommend, because we believe SDG 16 is an enabler and accelerator of all other SDGs. So that's the second point. Then after that, we have 6 thematic sessions in the recommendation, namely civil space, gender and sexuality, corruption, democratic governance, financial security concern, science, technology, and civil society, and violence against children. Each session is about one of the recommendations that is included. Then this declaration was adopted by all the participants. However, as you notice, This declaration was based on the discussion on the Tokyo Democracy Forum, that means yesterday's session. And today and tomorrow, the 2 days we discuss wider subject in this C20 group. That recommendations are not yet included. So we agreed later if you have any other recommendation to the G20 meetings, that could be added to the agenda. So that will be submitted later to the Secretariat. That point was also confirmed. And so after reviewing all the day one session, I just would like to express my personal observation or views. I noticed it's really important point is that, as mentioned, the title of this Agenda 2030 is Transforming the World. And the many participants yesterday emphasized, discussion is important, but that's not enough. What we have to do is action. And in this case, many people also expressed what's happened. Our previous recommendation, are they really implemented? Or just every year we are just, submitting the recommendations. So I believe it is really important to follow up all the recommendations we made with all the G20 countries. So in this connection, maybe I feel it may be a time to create a permanent secretariat of these C20 groups, so that annual secretariat continues, but together we can follow up what happens, each recommendations. Otherwise, every year we are just producing the similar set of the recommendations, and we are not sure if G20 government can indeed implement this. But this is just my personal feeling or suggestions based on the experience. Thank you very much. Now, Diana will very briefly introduce today's program.
So you all have the agenda, so we're gonna review all together very briefly. We're gonna start with a special session where we're gonna submit the C20 policy back to the G20 president. After, we're gonna have a high-level panel where the G20 Chef team will meet and discuss with civil society working groups, with a representative of some of the working groups of the G20. Afterwards, we have a keynote speech with a video message by the chairperson of the Working Group on Business and Human Rights for the United Nations. And after lunch, we're going to split in 4 breakout sessions. They're going to be in parallel. You have over there all the sessions about education, responsible business conduct, SDGs funding, and conflict-affected communities and growth. After, we're going to have a coffee break, and after the coffee break, we're going to also split in 3 sessions that are going to be in parallel again on Leave No One Behind in Universal Healthcare, Environment, Climate and Energy, and International Taxation, Regulation and Debt. And afterwards, we're going to do the wrap-up of this second day of the C20 Summit. And at 5:45, we're going to have the reception at the main hall as the ending of this second day of the C20 Summit. So now we're going to ask Martin and Kaori, the next presenters, to take over. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Hello. Good morning once again. You look sleepy. This is just the second day. Good morning once again and welcome to the second day of our C20 Summit. We are going to start this second day with a special session. This special session will give you some light on the cooking part of all of this. You know, we are now on the table with a good menu of our policy pact that was cooked somewhere. It was cooked in a kitchen. That kitchen had a number of chefs who are here with us and who are part of a structured process which is at the core of the C20. You have a steering committee which has been working. You have an international advisory committee which has been in interrelation with all the working groups. All of this forms a structure which has been behind this work, coordinating your material, the material that you brought. And that structure is also the structure that ensures that we do have continuity from where we start with the presidency to the present presidency and looking at the next one. That's historical.
Let me briefly introduce Chair is Yuka Iwatsuki and Co-Chair Atsuko Miwa and Sherpa Masaki Naba and Sous Sherpa Aoi Horiuchi. So they are making great efforts to materialize this C20.
I couldn't hear that. I couldn't hear their voices. It would be loud enough. That was the first line of the chefs in the kitchen. The second line of the chefs now comes. Wait. Why don't you stay there, please? Stay there and let us see all the lines. Now we are going to invite the International Advisory Committee. Are we here? And the steering committee. Members of the steering committee, please come forward.
Yes, ma'am.
I thought they knew their names. Okay, members of the steering committee, we are going to call your names. Please, Ines. Is Ines here? From Civicus? Steve Price Thomas? Enrique? Patricia's not here. I know Patricia's not here. Neviano. Valeria? Hideki is already here. Can you see Hideki? Yuka, I saw her. Katsuri is not here. Maria? Very transparent, right? Matthew. Is Matthew here? And then Anselmo. Where's Anselmo? Good. So you've got the second line of the chefs. They are all here. Have I forgotten someone?
Martin, yourself.
I forgot myself. I'm part of the kitchen. I'm part of the chefs. Yes, I'm going up. It's me.
Please look at the page 62 and 63. I'm sorry, 60, 61 and 62 to 63. All of them are here.
Everyone, please look at the photographer in the black shirt.
Coordinators, international and local coordinators, and about 20 of them. So please come up to the stage. Coordinators have been working so hard to make this policy pack. So please come up. I'm not going to call on each name. name of each person, but please look at the policy pack so that you can see all the names and pictures.
You are walking, we are behind you.
Thank you very much.
Bien, gracias.
You see how many chefs we've been having. No wonder we have this good food.
A special session. And Honorable Toshiko Abe, the State Minister of Foreign Affairs, is here today. So, and now we'd like to call on the three chairs, Chair of C20 Argentina of 2018 and C20 Japan of 2019 and this year, and Chair Saudi Arabia of 2020. So actually, they already met with Prime Minister Shinzo Abe and then handed over to the policy pack, the policy pack. Due to the Prime Minister's official trip to US and Europe, he's not here, but Yuka and other chairs will be reporting what happened to the day with Prime Minister. So let me invite again three chairs of C20. Please come up to the stage.
So we have our Troika. Our Troika is here. We have the former chair, the present one, and the next one. This is a strong team.
Yes, so shall I start? Okay.
Yes.
So, good morning, everyone. Your voice is so small. What happened to you? Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Thank you. So, I'm Yuka. I'm the chair of the C20 Summit C20 this year, 2019. And I'm really glad to have you all here today. I did my greeting yesterday, but I know some of you have started to come to the C20 from today. So I extend my gratitude to all participants who came to the C20 today and tomorrow. So this session intends to discuss and report what has been done and also to extend the policy back to the government officially again. So from myself, I'd like to introduce to you and report to you what we have, how we handed the policy back to the Prime Minister. So on 18th April, we were invited to go to the Cabinet office, in his office, and we visited him with 10 of us, and we had about 15 minutes session meeting with him and officers. So I'd like to introduce what we said and what was his reaction was quickly. myself spoke, and also co-chair Miwa-san spoke in Japanese, and we mentioned the issues that are raising in the world, and also we mentioned that it's only 10 years to the 2030 agenda goal target year. So our key message was to take action now. There are so many promises, commitments made in G20, and we expect the G20 presidency Japan to take the leadership to encourage the government to take more action that's been already agreed. That was the key message. And we also mentioned about the concerns we have, including the widening gap of the economy and wealth, as well as other raising concerns like environment and so on. His remarks were like this: Japan will be hosting G20 for the first time, and we will be addressing the global issues such as free trade, economic growth through innovation, and addressing global issues. And he said he notes that as fourth industry revolutions are rising, he's aware that there are anxieties amongst ourselves that this might just widen the gap we already have. So he said that he intends to lead the discussions for more inclusive growth, free trade, with the principle of harmony that Japan cherishes, and he tried to find a common goal while G20 country has different views. So those were the messages that we received from him, and he also took notes that the policy path that we handed to him does include the issues that should be addressed in the G20. So you can see the pictures on the stage, and that was the morning of the April 18th that we had an opportunity to hand the policy back to Prime Minister Abe. So I thank Ministry of Foreign Affairs for setting this meeting for us, and also despite his busy schedule, it was we appreciate that he had this time for us, for the civil society, and to meet with us. I know that from Russia 2013, was it 16? C20 has been meeting the head of the state, who is the president of the G20 chair of the every G20. So we are glad that we did not, we succeeded that tradition of meeting the G20 chair this time. And I am also very grateful and honored to have Honorable State Minister of Foreign Affairs, Ms. Abe, today to have her remarks and dialogue with us.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'd like to invite Her Highness Princess Nuh bin Muhammad bin Abdullah Al Hussein. Would you please share with us your impression of the meeting?
Thank you very much, Muhammad from King Khalid Foundation in Saudi Arabia. First, I'd like to say that it was an honor to meet Honorable Prime Minister. He gave us quite a bit of his time, and he was very much engaged and seemed to be proactive. He promised, as I said, to mobilize the spirit of harmony that prevails in Japanese society and culture, to move forward the points made in the communique and the recommendations. And I'm sure we are confident that he will do so, that they will work on results and will action the recommendations put forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And Valeria Yanes, would you also say a few words?
はい、
everybody. I just want to make a little declaration. My organization was part last year of the steering committee, and we worked jointly with two great organizations that had the chair and the co-chair last year. We consider as C20 absolutely quite positive that Prime Minister Abe received the C20 policy back and gave this sign of continuity of the tradition that started by former presidents that were the presidents of the G20 in the last editions, and we hope that this tradition continues, but also reflects in concrete gestures. And it was also great that came up in the meeting that the G20 has still work to do in the implementations of the commitment that they already made in past editions. So we hope they push forward that agenda. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much. So now I'd like to invite State Minister, the Honorable Ms. Toshiko Abe. Please come up to the stage. Please welcome Ms. Toshiko Abe.
Welcome, Honorable. This is a very, very special moment. Very special moment. The policy pack is being handed to the minister. Please give a hand to this. Now let us hear what the minister has to say.
Good morning, everybody. Madam Chair, Mr. Yuka Iwatsuki, and distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, and good morning. I'm Toshiko Abe, State Minister of Foreign Affairs of Japan. Welcome everyone to C20 Japan. It is an honor and privilege for me to be here today with civil society members. Thank you for the presentation of your recommendations. The various engagement groups communicate messages such as those of the C20 are important to us. It is because this adds broader perspectives to G20 process and make our discussion more fruitful. As the host committee for this year G20 Osaka Summit, Japan is determined to deliver the strong message by leading global economic growth through the promotion of the free trade and the innovation, addressing dispersives and the contributing to the resolution of environment and the global challenges. Not only government, but also civil society play important roles in tackling these issues. Therefore, we look forward to having candidate discussions with take into account civil society's recommendation. Now, I would like to briefly introduce our recent effort on the human society, which Japan has long been leading the international community. In February this year, the government of Japan co-hosted the high-level event Human Society at the 25 in New York, in cooperating with the UN and the UN member state. At this symposium, we review the history of the human society over the past 25 years and reaffirm that it grows ever more relevant in the SDGs era. The notion of the human society, which focuses on the protection, on empowerment of each and every individual, is reflected in the people-centered SDGs approach. In order to achieve a society where no one is left behind, Japan will exert concrete effort both internationally and domestically. I would like to emphasize that Japan will lead effort on the main SDG issue through that G20 Osaka Summit in June and that TICAD 7 in Yokohama in August. These issues include polluting infrastructure, disaster risk reduction, marine plastic litter, climate change, gender equality, and health and education. Prime Minister Abe will also highlight the outcome of the both G20 and the TICAD at SDG Summit, which would be held in the UN General Assembly in September. The last but not least, I would like to extend my sincere respect and gratitude to the 2019 G20 Summit civil society platform and all these who took part of organization this G20 Summit. It is great pleasure for Minister of Foreign Affairs to cooperate and work very closely with NGOs through the G20 planning process. This being a good practice, we would like to further strengthen cooperating with NGOs. I would greatly appreciate it if you continue to share your expertise as you address global challenges. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Honorable Minister. You heard the Minister. This is a new era of collaboration between the civil society and governments, particularly the Japanese government. And she said Japan will carry the strong message that we may have to other leaders for it to open a real cooperation era. I think it starts now with this special session. That's why our conversation is a dialogue, Honorable Minister. I think Yuka and other colleagues have something to say after you. Yuka?
So thank you very much, Sabe, for your kind remarks and your recognition to the C20 Summit and your congratulations. As you have mentioned in your remark, I, as a civil society, also would like to echo with the Japanese government that we are in the era that we have to work together in many ways to address the global issues. As a civil society role, we are sometimes work as a watchdog that we have to point out the things that has not been done correctly, but we are also the ones we work with the government on the ground. We are the ones, all of us here, who has heard from the people who are actually suffering now from the poverty or lack of education, violence, etc. So we are here, and we are the lucky ones who can be here, but we are responsible for other people who are not here to make their voices heard and make sure that the conditions that they are suffering has been heard by the policymaker and decision maker. Also, we are open to work with the government when needed, especially in implementing programs. So many people here probably are the ones who are actually the partners or implementers of the sometimes offshore development assistance and so on. So we also would like to ask your understanding and cooperation in this end that we are ready to work more with the government to make things better and forward. But lastly, I'm sorry I'm repeating it again, but our main concerns from the yesterday as well is that because the G20 itself has been continuing since the financial crisis, and every year the new presidency wants to make new commitments, and that's great that things are advancing. But we also want to remind the G20 countries that there are commitments already made that has not been implemented yet. So that's why we made concrete recommendations in the policy pack to bring your attention to those commitments as well. So please, I ask the government of Japan to please take a note of the recommendations in the policy pack and give the consideration to them, and to reflect some of the recommendations that you find useful on the G20 table, so that the delivery of the G20 commitments and implementation would advance.
Thank you very much, Yuka. That was the present. Let us get a foot back in history and hear what Valeria has to say, following what the minister said, looking at the past, looking at what we did before.
Okay. Thank you for your kind words. Following some of the things that Yuka said, I want to highlight that the C20 is kind of a new process. It's almost 5 years old, and of course represents a huge challenge to keep the essence of this space, which are the global character of this space, and also the transparency in the process. We have managed to make huge efforts to improve this process, to have a strong voice as civil society. Gestures like the Prime Minister Abe had receiving us and former head of states receiving the C20 are great, but also it should be improved in concrete spaces for work within civil society, with the working groups of the G20, not only in the Sherpa track, but also at the finance track, which is quite difficult. So I took the stage to make a call on this and open the spaces to interact and receive the input that all the expertise of the civil society can bring to the G20 process. And the last thing that I am reflecting is that these kind of gestures of having here a very high-level representative of the state of Japan is also a sign that civil society organizations should be preserved and let them work freely and with respect for her work, not shrinking the space of civil society organizations. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Valeria. That was the voice of the past. Now let us send our eyes into the future with Her Highness Nuuf.
Thank you very much, Minister, and I'd just like to thank our host, the Japanese, for organizing such an event, an important event. The words I heard, I think give hope and optimism, because I think we hear that you take civil society very seriously, and communicate what was in it in part to action. For us, civil society, I think, represents a tool and opportunity for governments. And we urge all governments to utilize the expertise and professionalism here and in this room. We have continuity on our side. We've been here for 5 years in the C20, but everybody here has been here for much longer, and hopefully will continue with their mission. And what we do is quantifiable and measurable. Our target markets are the ones that the SDGs have promised to help. They're the people and the causes that have been left behind. And we're working to bring them ahead with us. I our achievements are measurable, as I said, quantifiable. We don't measure our successes by internal investment or a stock price. It is the human element that we measure. And we have the tools right now to measure all of this. And you can see our track record. So we urge all governments in the G20 to use us and not look at us as adversaries. We're extremely neutral. We're civil society, and I think we're a bunch of civil people. We're from all over the world. We have different values and goals, but we appreciate that and we respect that, and we work together towards the SDGs and towards bringing everybody and not leaving anybody behind. And I would just like to thank everybody here again for all the good work. People in the civil society world I find extremely special. They work from the heart, and it's sometimes thankless. They get a lot of negativity, but it's their spirit, and when they see the human element or they see an improvement in the environment, this is what keeps us going. So please utilize us and use us and take our actions into consideration and our demands into consideration, and help us and help the world continue to a better place. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you, our Troika, our representatives. Honorable Minister, you heard our people, you heard our voice. What you just heard is not the voice of 3 people, but it's the voice of more than 300 civil society organizations, meaning that you heard the voice of more than, thousands of people. What would your concluding word be, Honorable Minister?
Thank you very much for your comments and suggestions. Lastly, let me touch upon the importance of civil society and our two-way collaboration in advancing the international cooperation. Japan and NGO have extensive knowledge and expertise in assisting people in difficult circumstances in developing countries. They are also capable of responding promptly and flexibly to situation on the ground. While paying the respect to the NGO independence, the Ministry regarded Japan NGO as our essential partners in delivering visible Japanese assistance to the people in need. In this regard, Ministers have been playing emphasis on 3 key areas, namely, first one, funding NGO developing activities. Second, cooperating on NGO capability building. And third, policy dialogue with NGOs. 2, enhancing our collaboration. And for funding, we support various projects in which NGO can perform their particular strengths and capacities, from emergency humanitarian assistance for victims of national disaster or dispute to long-term economic and social development plans. And also, we have been continuing active enhancing with NGOs through regular policy dialogue and discussion with over 2 decades. We would like to work more closely with the Japanese NGOs that takes global challenges and share our goals, such as NGOs, SDGs. To this end, the Minister have recently decided significant expand indirect cost coverage for Japanese NGO projects. I would like to ensure that you will continue working closely with the civil society for the strength and deepen our well-cultivated relationship. we respect and a lot of expectation on you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Honorable. Thank you many times, because you just commissioned a new era. That is the era of collaboration between the civil society and the Japanese government, plus their peers in other leading countries in the world, because the G20 is a leading part of our leading structures in the world. So you will be known in history as the representative of the Japanese government who started this new conversation with the civil society. We wish to thank you for this. We thank you very, very much. You heard with me, dear colleagues, that this is not just words. Japan is committed to be with us, to work with us, and to try to find solutions with us. You heard the 3 tools that the minister presented. One of these tools is policy dialogue. Is that what you said? Policy dialogue means that our leaders are ready to receive the material that our expertise can create. Let us keep on working, create that material, push it forward, and we can count on the government of Japan to take it forward. We heard that today. We also heard that a few days ago from the Prime Minister himself. So we thank you also. Thank the government of Japan and thank all of us. Let us give her another hand.
Okay, so let us conclude this session. Thank you so much. And actually, I really am so happy to see 3 chairs, State Minister, and 3 chairs who happen to be all women. So thank you very much. Thank you so much. So we are now starting the second session. So please take a seat. Okay, so now we are starting high-level panel with G20 Sherpa track. I'd like to invite all the speakers, including Sue Sherpa. So please come up to the stage. The first of all, Mr. Tamaki Tsukada, Sue Sherpa. Leno, Enrique Montas Constantinides, Maria Emilia Baratatecu, Rodney Martin. Please come up to the stage and please take a seat.
Okay, let us welcome our panelists. Where are your hands? Thank you very much. Thank you, dear panelists. Mr. Tsuda, you have the floor.
Good morning, everyone, and I'd like to first of all thank Ms. Yuka Iwatsuki, Chair of the C20, and the international members of the C20 committee for inviting me to this panel and today's event. I really appreciate this opportunity, and I very much look forward to discussing the key topics that we will take up in the G20 later this year. Today I would like to share with you some of the key issues that we are now discussing in the Sherpa process. And we really appreciate this kind of interaction with civil society in the process because we do appreciate very much the inputs from the wider public, and increasingly, as you know, the G20 is becoming a sort of multi-stakeholder process. Every year, the number of engagement groups is growing. I think almost every alphabet we have some kind of 20s already, including, of course, the C20. So I really do appreciate this kind of interaction and participatory dialogue that we are now developing. As all of you know, G20 is considered as the premier forum for international economic cooperation. And G20 brings together a unique combination of countries with growing stature and influence in the international economy. Looking back over the history, we all know that the G20 started as a crisis management process in the wake of the Lehman shock. Since then, the global economy has recovered from the shock and have enjoyed positive growth, having addressed important sort of systemic flaws that caused the shock in the first place, if not all, admittedly, but at least we are able to address some of the substantial defects of the system. But nothing is permanent in the international economy. And now downturn risks are looming again. Now, how to confront and minimize these risks will be the key question we will be putting to the leaders in Osaka. Furthermore, the future of the global economy is uncertain as the progress in transformative technologies such as IoT and AI is bringing about tremendous change to human lives. With this in mind, I would like to share with you the key agendas of the G20 Osaka Summit. First, as I just mentioned, the top agenda would be to assess the state of the global economy and work collectively to achieve a sustainable and inclusive growth. Second, we will align our approaches to the so-called global issues covered by the SDGs and reaffirm the important role and responsibility of the G20 in this effort. And finally, the overarching or cross-cutting theme of harnessing the power of technology and innovation. Now, first, I would like to briefly explain what we are now discussing on the first topic of global economy and sustainable and inclusive growth. Of course, the current economic situation is nothing comparable to the situation in 2008. But the G20 leaders need to be vigilant so as to respond collectively to any economic downturns that may occur suddenly, triggered by political or economic or financial contingency. So in this context, one of the most urgent tasks for the G20 leaders is to resuscitate our confidence in the multilateral trading system. Trade tensions have started to weigh heavily on the prospects for growth. In this context, the reform of the WTO remains an important priority for Osaka. Although the G20 is not a negotiating forum, the G20 can and should provide strong political impetus for a better functioning WTO, attuned to rapidly changing global trading environments such as explosive growth in e-commerce. System reform needs to be underpinned by efforts to tackle persistent market-distorting trading practices. Representing 80% of the global economy, the G20 members have a special responsibility by keeping their markets open and refraining from recourse to such unfair trade practices. Second, the question of women's empowerment remains a fundamental theme, and we will continue to develop the women's agenda, building on the previous G20 efforts for more equitable and inclusive growth. Japan aims to highlight improved labor participation by women, as well as measures to foster environments conducive to women's empowerment, including education and entrepreneurship. Population aging. Despite very divergent demographic profiles of the G20 countries, there has been a strong support among the G20 to deepening the discussions on this subject. Demographic change, together with advancement of technology and globalization, is reshaping the world of employment, and ministers and leaders will discuss the key questions, such as how to adapt to the demographic change, longer working hours, or longer working lives, for that matter, and new job opportunities driven by technology, while also mindful of our commitment to narrowing the gender participation gap in the labor market. The next point relates to the G20 efforts to address global challenges such as climate change and energy transition to the more non-fossil fuel economy. International health, marine plastic litter, anti-corruption, immigration, and migration. These are some of the topics that will be covered within this broad framework of global challenges. In this area, the discussions in the previous summits will provide an important foundation. On the SDGs, G20 has produced an annual update on the G20's progress on the implementation of the SDGs. We will emphasize this year, especially on the monitoring and implementation of our commitments. This year's update will be designed to contribute to the high-level discussion of the United Nations high-level meeting in September. On quality infrastructure, guidance from the past G20 work will be taken into consideration in seeking to elaborate a set of principles which includes elements such as transparency, openness, economic efficiency in view of the life cycle cost, and debt sustainability. The unique challenges facing Africa also remains an important theme, and we hope the G20 will provide useful inputs to the TCAD 7, which will take place later this year. The issue of climate change will be a key challenge for the Japanese presidencies because the G20 has failed to find a consensus on the issue lately. Japan believes this area requires pragmatic debates to find common ground for concerted action by the G20. Energy transition and innovation might be the key to find that consensus that we need and the common ground to explore. On the problem of marine plastic litter, Japan would like to present a long-term vision on the effective international measures to bring on board both the developed and developing members. Now finally, I'd like to briefly share with you how we try to bring this topic of innovation as a cross-cutting and overarching theme for the Osaka Summit. ICT is transforming global trade and finance. Technological innovation can play in global efforts to overcome wide-ranging economic and social challenges, from population aging to climate change. On the other hand, the problem is that the pace of innovation-driven change is often difficult to respond to resultant economic and social dislocation in a timely manner. For the same reasons, the efforts to create an appropriate system of governance tend to lag behind, and this concern is becoming acute as the virtual domain is becoming more integrated into the real domain with the advent of IoT and AI. Furthermore, there is a danger that technological development will lead to a new divide within and across societies. So this was the reason why Prime Minister Abe in Davos early this year in February, expressed his determination to accelerate international discussion on data governance. Although this is not an easy task, the matter, we think, merits attention of world leaders, and we hope Osaka could crystallize global discussion on this very important topic. Finally, I would like to emphasize the importance of active engagement of stakeholders, including civil society, in the G20 process to foster public support for multilateralism and inform the leaders of the perspective of the wider public. For this reason, we appreciate very much the recommendations of the 2019 C20 communique, and I very much look forward to today's discussion as an important milestone to the G20 Osaka Summit. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Kata. I'm not going to repeat it, I'm not going to summarize because this is what I was quite clear what he said. I'm now going to invite our respondents, starting with you, Thomas. What would you say following what we just heard?
Thank you very much, and thanks for spending the time with us. We appreciate it. The organisers told me I had 5 minutes to respond, and in that time I should cover all general development issues, development finance, and the SDGs. And that's going to be tricky in 5 minutes, so with your permission I'll focus just on a few items rather than all of them. And in particular the questions of why should the G20 engage with civil society, and what do we think the G20 needs to do, and how can we work together. And I was very pleased to hear your last comments about the importance of engagement, and look forward to working with you. Because it's now 10 years since G20 started engaging with civil society, and I'm delighted that Anselmo Lee had organised that very first engagement under the Seoul Summit, and the South Korean Presidency is here with us. And it's 6 years since the since the engagement was formalized under the Russian presidency. And I think the reason why civil society has chosen to engage so closely with the G20 over that time is that the G20 makes decisions which affect real people's lives and affects the lives of citizens around the world. And for that reason, it's vital that we do all we can to bring the voices of citizens around the world, and particularly of marginalized, of excluded people to the G20 table. Because ultimately, for me, a successful G20 presidency, yes, addresses the issues which you raised, but does so in a way which furthers the interests of poor, of marginalized, of excluded people across every thematic issue. And actually, I was struck. There was a lot of talk and chatter during the break, which is entirely appropriate. But I don't know if you noticed the music which was playing in the background. And the music that was playing in the background, I was quite surprised, was from Pink Floyd, which is a great old band, but the music was Comfortably Numb, was the song that was playing. And I think our task as civil society and the Civil 20 is to ensure that neither we nor the G20 leaders sitting around the table in Osaka become comfortably numb to the real challenges which face people across the world. And civil society colleagues here who maybe have not had the opportunity to engage over the past 10 years, which I've been fortunate enough to do, might question, well, is it really possible for civil society to influence the G20? And the answer is an unequivocal yes. So, and to influence it for the better. So just by way of example, out of that first civil society interaction in 2010, out of that came the Seoul Development Consensus and the formation of the Development Working Group. And in fact, I heard in 2012, the representative of a G20 government from a major country, not from Japan, I'm pleased to say, but from a major country that I shan't name, say that they really didn't want development to be on the G20 agenda, but it was there now permanently because of the South Korean presidency and because of civil society. And it's still there as a key thing. And civil society did that. There's commitments in the anti-corruption working group and working anti-corruption working group that only happens because of civil society. The BEPS process, base erosion and profit shifting on global tax reforms, benefited a lot from civil society engagements. And of course, I work for Oxfam, and the continual increased focus, still not enough we think, but the increased focus on inequality, again, is happening largely because of work of colleagues around across global civil society, many of whom are in this room. So then there's the question then about, what does G20 need to do now? And in here, and I hope we're able to give you a copy of this, certainly presented one to your Prime Minister and to State Minister of Foreign Affairs, Abe, in the previous session. In here, there are constructive recommendations that have been developed by working groups with representatives from Japanese civil society and from across the world that we believe have got constructive suggestions of actions which we recommend the G20 should take. And I'll just highlight just in a couple of areas, and I know the colleagues on the panel will talk about more. Obviously, as I said, a big interest for me is about inequality. We live in a world now where just a handful of men own the same wealth as the bottom half of the world. And connected to that, I don't think it's a coincidence, we're also seeing a crisis of multilateralism. We're seeing people losing faith in institutions, in some countries at national level, certainly at an international level. And we're seeing a rise in many countries, including some G20 countries, of misogynist xenophobia, of increased populism, of a sort of a nasty form of nationalism. And for me, one of the reasons that underpins that is the challenge of inequality and the fact that people feel they're not getting their fair share. So I would like to suggest that the G20 should really do all it can to address and reverse that increasing inequality. I'm very pleased to hear both you and State Minister Abe refer to the importance of education, of health, because those two things over people's lifetimes are what is best about transforming society so that they become more equal. Also, global tax reform, building on the BEPS process to make sure that developing countries are able to raise the taxes that they need in order to pay for education and health services, to make sure that multinational companies are not, declaring profits in tax havens rather than declaring profits where the activity takes place. There's a whole range of things which I hope the Osaka Summit can make progress on. And I was also pleased to hear you mention the commitments to gender inequality. We're 5 years, we're halfway through now the period for the 25 by 25 initiative. Came out of the Australian Summit in 2014 to increase women's labour force participation by 25% by 2025. It would be great if you can encourage other G20 member countries to really give a clear update of where they are on that, because we're halfway there now, to be transparent about what measures they're putting in place and to demonstrate what what impact those have. Because if there isn't that transparency, then we're never going to know if we're going to make it to achieve that target or not. And then just I know I'm running out of time. The other area I would highlight is just on climate. I know that Enrique will talk more about that. But while we recognise, as you said, that that there is not consensus within the G20 on this, I certainly believe it's important that the other 19 countries must avoid backtracking, and even if it means that finally one country, the United States, is not willing to sign up to it, that's not an ideal outcome, but it's better than everybody else backtracking. So we would really like to see a firm commitment to the Paris Agenda in the outcome of the Osaka summit, and see a commitment particularly to financing for adaptation, because ultimately it's people living in poverty who are hit first and worst by climate change. I'm just seeing a sign. I'm wearing my reading glasses, so I saw a sign which was held up and I couldn't read what it says, but I can guess. So I'm sure it doesn't say, "This is great, so you get 10 more minutes." Just to conclude, I would say that we as civil society really want to engage with you. We welcome what you said about the importance of active engagement. But to do that, we need access and we need information. There's still, I think, I looked at the G20 official website yesterday, and a lot of it under priorities and documents still says work in progress or under construction. So it'd be great if you could ask your colleagues to kindly put the documents up there as soon as they can, so that we're able to engage properly. As in previous years, the Civil 20 working groups have had access to the various official working groups of the G20 under the Sherpa track. It'd be great if we can do that again, so that relevant experts in civil society can engage. And also, if maybe colleagues from the Japan C20 can make a presentation of what's in here to a Sherpa meeting. That first started under the Russian presidency in 2013. It's happened every year since, so it'd be great if that can happen too. I know I'm well over my time, so I should stop there. We really appreciate you being here. Look forward to the occasion.
Thank you very much, Steve. I understand that this is a group of respondents who are doing a solidarity chain, and that you borrowed a few minutes from your colleagues. So let's proceed with Emilia. Be mindful of time. Any minute that you borrow will be listening to your colleagues.
Thank you very much for being here with us. We really appreciate that you participate of this dialogue with civil society representatives. And I was very pleased when you mentioned corruption as a global issue, because I will be focusing on anti-corruption and what C20 believes the G20 could be doing in order to move forward the anti-corruption agenda. And I will also link it with SDGs, because I think that this is something key, and as the Japanese presidency, I know that we also want to move this agenda forward. Only a few days ago, the IMF said that every year $1 trillion is lost because of corruption in tax revenues. And at the same time, the UN is saying that low and lower middle income countries will need $1.4 trillion in order to achieve SDGs. So at the C20, we wonder what this $1 trillion that gets lost for corruption every year might have in the SDGs agenda. Now, imagine the great impact that we could have if we tackle corruption in an effective way in order to make sure that this $1 trillion go where it really needs to go, you know? So from a civil society perspective, we have worked together, and I will give you my copy of my policy pack, so then you can read the recommendations that all the C20 working groups did on 4 priorities, you know. My first issue would be that anti-corruption should not be left in a silo. Right now, the anti-corruption community feels that at the G20, anti-corruption working group is left in a silo. You know, they don't have any kind of effective dialogue with the rest of the working groups, not only of the Sherpa track, but also of the finance track. And at least for us, this is really concerning this year particularly, because the Japanese presidency is focusing on quality infrastructure. We believe that this is really a great priority, but we really want the anti-corruption working group to have an effective and ongoing dialogue, not only with the infrastructure working group at the finance track, but also with the development working group, because we already know that they are also working on infrastructure. Secondly, I'm really happy that you're welcoming an active engagement with civil society. I will add the word effective. I believe that that is what we are really needing at the G20. At the anti-corruption working group, civil society, I believe that we have really a unique opportunity if we compare it with the rest of the working groups, because we are invited together with the business representatives to share only for 10 minutes, but at least it's something, you know, our ideas and recommendations. This is really great, but it's not the case in all the G20 working groups, and here I would like to address about what's going on the finance track, where many colleagues from civil society have been working really hard in order to get access to the finance track, and they are not even invited as speakers in side events. So we have been trying to have access with Peter, my colleague from the infrastructure working group, to a side event of infrastructure, and we weren't even allowed to speak at a side event. So we really believe that if we take into account all the expertise that civil society have, the G20 would really benefit of us. You know, we are not only watchdogs in this room, you have a lot of people with huge knowledge and expertise that will be really happy to share ideas and knowledge. And let me give you a concrete example about this. For instance, at the C20 Anti-Corruption Working Group and Infrastructure Working Group, we are calling G20 countries to adopt specific standards when it comes to open data, because as my colleague Steve has said, it's really important not only for civil society but also for citizens to have access to public information. When it comes to beneficial ownership, for instance, one of the G20 commitments since 2014, we are calling to adopt the open ownership standard. And when it comes to quality infrastructure, cost and open contracting partnership, two civil society organizations have developed the open contracting for infrastructure data standard. We do believe that this is key because we allow citizens, civil society, business, journalists to compare information all over the globe. And when it comes also to effective engagement with civil society, right now what's going on is that they invite us only for 10 minutes. They don't share with us the agenda of the meeting, so we go to a meeting where we don't know what they are actually speaking. I believe that it would be great if in the near future the G20 could consider to invite civil society representatives not only to a short session of their meetings, but to thematic sessions where, for instance, if you're discussing about beneficial ownership, we can go and give our expertise on beneficial ownership. When you do it about gender and corruption, about gender and corruption. The third topic would be implementation. Since 2010, the G20 has been doing all the right noises when it comes to anti-corruption. You have established a specific anti-corruption working group, and you have developed and adopted more than 60 anti-corruption resources. Most of them are really amazing, but what we are seeing is really lack of effective implementation. And we do believe that that would be really amazing if you could start moving the agenda forward to actually start implementing your commitments. We are very happy because we know that the new anti-corruption action plan is focusing on implementation, and that's really fantastic. So we expect to see in the whistleblower high-level principles and the infrastructure principle you're working on a really strong focus on implementation. And I'm running out of time, so my last point would be about accountability. That is something that we believe that it's time for the G20 to improve and publish more information about what they are doing. The G20 is seen as a space that works largely behind closed doors, where people, civil society, journalists don't know what's really going on. And one of the causes is because, for instance, we are changing the G20 website every now and then. Civil society is not invited to many of their meetings. So we believe that countries should have really strong accountability mechanisms of how they're moving forward in the implementation of all their commitments. And in this sense, we would really appreciate if at least in the anti-corruption working groups, they could start reporting as they did in the Australian presidency, where we had country per country report and not a global report. That's all, so I can give you the word. And once again, thank you so much for coming and being here with us.
Thank you, Lydia.
For kicking off the discussion, as mentioned by the speaker, innovation is both overarching and cross-cutting in the G20. And since 2016, we have seen a number of documents coming from G20 discussions focusing particularly on the digital economy. And the magic word is how to make the digital economy inclusive. The thing is, this has been a challenge that not just G20 is facing, but also the UN and also at the national level. In the face of the reality that we are in a world where we have the international community has set a goal of the 2030, that by 2030 we'll be leaving no one behind. So we cannot separate what's being discussed in the G20 with regards to what's being discussed by the international community, particularly in the 2030 agenda. And inclusiveness is really a dream that the G20 has to be running after. And it is fatal to assume that it is going to be automatic. Definitely it's not. There has to be deliberate effort to deliver inclusiveness and to also deliver that dream of a 2030 where we are going to leave no one behind. And here innovations play a very critical role, not just as providing opportunities for inclusiveness, but also offering an explanation on why we are here. In a world where, as described by Steve, you have a handful of white men owning over half of the world's wealth, not even the bottom half is not even matched by what the bottom half owns. And it is very important to take stock and also hold the bull by the horn, as mentioned by Steve, that a key thing that we have to discuss in the G20 and why innovation plays a role is the inequality that we're facing right now. Like the top 10 corporations in the world, like 7 out of those 10 are actually digital platforms. And 2 out of those 10 are actually financial investment houses. And it is by no coincidence that innovation is at the reason behind this wealth. And it is also no coincidence why
one of the world's top corporations, Amazon, does not pay not even a dollar of tax in the US, for example. And many of these corporations are even getting tax rebates, which is very perverse. And to me, this is really key. If you're going to address inequality, is we have to address the tools that are being used to reinforce inequality. And in this sense, the digital economy, digitalization plays a big role in the inequality that we have now. The digital tools that we're looking at as opportunities are at the same time offering a big obstacle and challenges to the way forward for us towards reaching that goal of a 2030 world where we're actually leaving no one behind. And part of the way forward is also to provide social protection to those who will be affected, who will be meeting the first obstacles that are faced by the digital economy. Like we are actually, we mentioned, as mentioned by the speaker, that there are opportunities presented by the digital economy. We have to face the reality that there are damages and injuries along the way that will be caused by the digital economy, and part of those are actually the displacement in labor. There are statistics that show that 3D printing alone will actually displace 25% of the labor force in the manufacturing sector. And G20 has to name that. And to be able to address that, we have to name the root causes of this inequality and also the damages along the way. We cannot expect that we will fix as we go. We have to fix now, and we have to involve the bottom of the pyramid to be able to name the problem, to name the obstacles, and to address them. And here is where governance plays a big role. When we look at governance, it's not going to be the G20 that will decide on where this future will bring us. We have to address now and provide mechanisms to be able to involve people, to be able to involve consumers and those who are affected by the digital economy at its dawn, in making a decision on what kind of future do we want to go, on what kind of technologies do we want to use to be able to address the developmental problems and the problems that we're facing right now. And we also have to take stock of the fact that the digital technologies that we are providing as a solution to the global developmental problems that we have now are also bringing in a lot of ecological and environmental problems. Like we are dealing with a situation where the digital platform is the key, and digital platform requires energy. It's not coming from the sky. You know, like the storage, the cloud that we're talking about are actually taking up energy and taking up resources. We have to take stock of these problems, the ecological footprint, the energy requirements. These things have to be faced and have to be named in the G20. While there are some strides taken in terms of making, providing some documents that would require opportunities for women to be able to take advantage of the opportunities provided by the digital economy by promoting entrepreneurship and education in STEM programs. These are not enough. We have to really hold the horn of the bull, address inequality, ensure that those at the bottom are part of the decision-making and governance, and for G20 to provide the impetus not to discuss governance in the WTO by having an e-commerce rule, but as an impetus for the international community and legitimately for the UN to be able to address the issues that are confronting us in the digital economy.
Thank you, Liz. You've eaten part of Enrique's time. I know he will be very lenient. Up to you, Enrique.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Representative Sushepa. I have 15 minutes to talk, right?
You mean 3?
3, okay, right. Because I have like so many issues, so many responses, and I appreciate that many of them were actually mentioned in the speech of the government of Japan. Indeed, climate change is actually threatening many of the conversations we are having. No wonder why in the last couple of years is a key part of the climate on the G20 agenda. Climate change threatens not only the ecosystems, not only societies, not only the economy, but also the people, and especially the most vulnerable. Women in particular are threatened by the impacts of climate change. And projections are not looking that great. That is a fact. And that is why we need to continue keeping the issue on the top of the agenda. We need to make sure that the next communiques, the communiques from the ministries, when they talk about environment and energy transitions, actually is aligned with the Paris Agreement, which all G20 countries are part of. And in addition to that, the leaders' communique, we deeply recognize that there is a challenge in the climate issue to actually come up with a consensus. So this is, it's not an easy task, it's true, and we support, and we have like a lot of recommendations in our policy ask to actually deal with the solutions and what the G20 should agree by the end of June in order to lead the transition towards sustainable future consumption, production of energy, and lead the transition to 100% renewables. From all these issues, we are talking about energy transitions, we are talking about climate finance, we are talking of impacts, infrastructure. It was mentioned about infrastructure and the role that could play, technology, innovation. All that has to be nowadays in the light of the SDGs, the international commitments, and the reality. Climate change does not distinguish between, does not differentiate between countries, policies. It does not distinguish between the decisions we make, or doesn't care about if a country is developed or developing. So, in the light of that, we need to make sure that this summit continues the work that has been done in previous years, continues to keep climate in the agenda, and I'm very happy to see that many of the key issues, such as the ambition towards 1.5, which is the key objective of the Paris Agreement, for the countries to review their commitments, to raise the ambition, continue supporting developing countries, and especially those most vulnerable, Africa, the islands, who will suffer the most out of the impacts. For that, climate finance is important. Financial flows, the transition towards a clean economy, and to avoid stranded assets. One final key issue is about fossil fuel subsidies, which is driving away the issues that we are talking. The fossil fuel subsidies are actually putting the money in the wrong bucket, and it has to be phased out. There is a long-term commitment for this. This will be the 10th year that the issues on the agenda. It would be great to actually have a commitment to effectively phase them out and in the near future. And of course, last but not least, in terms of plastic marine pollution, I think it's important. It's an issue that is picking up a lot. I'm pretty sure that everybody is fully aware of the problems with marine plastic litter. And we think that that has to come up in line with the agreements of the G7, and also to have a specific work programs that could actually move forward and show results. It was said earlier today that we want not only the G20 to have commitments, but actually to show progress and implementation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Enrique.
Thanks. 1 second.
I'm moving from the floor. 5 minutes for you from the floor.
Good morning, everyone. At first, I would like to share and echo the sentiments shared so far by civil society colleagues who have spoken before me, and thanking you for being here, and also for the opportunity for this dialogue. Additionally, I wish to actually express appreciation for the government of Japan for being such a leader in global health issues, including in championing universal health coverage, although I didn't hear you mention that explicitly a while ago as a key priority for this year's G20 beyond the issue of aging populations. Because indeed, leadership is the missing element. It's what we need to make sure that whatever the lofty goals on health that have so far already been committed in previous G20s, in previous global platforms, and in G20s of the future, including in this year's, and in the UHC high-level meeting that would happen September this year. We wish to see this commitment beyond being beautiful promises in paper. We really need to see action, and we need to see action now. Representing civil society from Asia Pacific, my organization at CASO has actually been lauding Japan in several platforms as a government from the region which has demonstrated the political will to achieve UHC domestically. And beyond that is leading not just the rest of the region but also the rest of the world in championing UHC. The world definitely needs this leadership because again, achieving UHC is not only a question of fiscal or financial challenges, but it's also a challenge of political will and leadership. We look to Japan to further elevate its leadership on UHC by championing not just any kind of UHC. We look to Japan to champion the UHC that we want, one that does not leave any population or country behind. The UHC that definitely we don't want is one that maintains the status quo and would just continue to privilege the already privileged, rich, and privileged nations and segments of the populations. We hope that through Japan's leadership and stewardship, the G20 would throw its weight and support behind the UHC that the world needs and that we want. What is our vision for the UHC that the world needs? Firstly, we want an equitable and rights-affirming UHC. We want a UHC that recognizes that the world is not an equal playing field when it comes to health and development. Beyond equal access, we want a UHC that this time prioritizes those who have almost always come last to now come first. To address exclusions that are not only financial but also social in terms of access to health. Equal access to health could not be achieved without enabling first equitable access of the most excluded communities, among them women and young people, people in aging populations, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer communities, mobile and migrant people, people in prisons and enclosed settings, indigenous people, people with disabilities, sex workers, people who use drugs, and people living with HIV and other diseases. Equitable and rights-affirming UHC entails including as part and parcel of UHC the removal of punitive laws and policies against some populations on the basis of their sexual orientation and gender identity or expression, drug use, engagement in sex work, or HIV, TB, migrant, and other status. Secondly, we want a people-centered UHC. We want health responses and systems that are centered to the health needs of people and communities rather than focus on diseases. We want a UHC that takes a holistic approach to health provision, promotion, and disease prevention. The stigma and discrimination against some communities pose huge barriers to their access to health services. Therefore, programs that sensitize service providers and that raise community awareness on their rights and empower the marginalized and underserved should be part and parcel of UHC packages. Thirdly, we want a UHC that meaningfully engages the participation of communities and civil society. In short, nothing for us without us. We have the biggest stake on if and how UHC is achieved and implemented. Put simply, it is our health and lives at stake. As such, we dream of a UHC where communities and civil society are equal partners of government and development partners in designing, implementing, budgeting, and reviewing health policies and plans that affect us, not just as nice things to do, but as critical components of effective health programming. Lastly, we want an effectively and sustainably financed UHC. We urge for G20 to hit our calls for 1, increases in country domestic resource allocations on health. Next, implementing concrete plans to remove out-of-pocket payments for essential drugs and services, and supporting efforts and challenging and opposing unfair trade agreements that restrict the affordability and accessibility of drugs, diagnostics, and medical technologies. We look to Japan to help the G20 rally towards global solidarity to achieve the UHC that we all want, not just in words, but also in action and financial contribution. We remind the donor countries of the G20 of their ODA commitments. We make a strong plea for development assistance for health to developing countries without string attached, meaning through aid rather than through loans. Finally, HIV, TB, and malaria remain as unfinished global agenda. It will take effective UHC implementation to help end the 3 diseases. At the same time, it will take the effective responses against these 3 diseases to achieve UHC. Declarations are nice and all, but G20 needs to show us the money. We look to Japan and the rest of the G20 countries to demonstrate their sincerity to UHC goals through increased contributions to the Global Fund towards a successful 6 replenishment October this year. Japan is already a champion of UHC, and we thank you for that. But same way that you have shared Japan's vision earlier as Sherpa of the G20, I'm just sharing with you our vision of the UHC that we want, as well as our vision of Japan as champion too of human rights, equity, and social justice. Towards this, expect us to throw behind our full support, as really the only way that we will achieve UHC and development justice is with the political will and courage and the willingness to dream of an alternative future by at least one country until that dream becomes the reality for all. Thanks.
Thank you, Audrey. Thank you, but you only 5 minutes. You took more than 5 minutes. So, you just heard the responses. We are trying to make this session very interactive, meaning that we are preparing to get the floor, say something, or ask for something, or comment. But before that, I imagine when the respondents were speaking, there might have been a time when you wanted to stop someone to say something very valid. Say it now before we open the floor, please.
Okay, of course, I would like to listen more from the floor, so I will limit my comments to a very minimum. But just responding quickly to some of the important remarks from the panel. First of all, I would like to sincerely apologize if anybody thought that there is lack of information given to the public. In fact, I haven't thoroughly checked our website, but if that is the appearance that we are kind of limiting the information, I will make sure that we will share whatever we have for broader sort of discussion, public discussion, because frankly, there's nothing that we are hiding, actually. But I have to admit that it's still rather early in the process, but of course this year we will have the summit very early, so I think we are gradually picking up the pace, and discussions and papers are now beginning to be circulated, so I will make sure that all the information will be available as much as possible. Now, some of the key topics that were raised, I think, centers around the notion of inclusivity and the need to address more the question of inequality. And in fact, if you look at the papers that we are now circulating internally, inclusivity is everywhere. It's one of the key thematic cross-cutting issues, whether it's in trade or development or employment, women's participation, climate, almost on any issue. I think the question of inclusivity is there. So it's firmly embedded in the discourse, G20 discussion. So I think there's no question that leaders are fully aware and cognizant of the importance of this notion. And secondly, on the question of inequality, of course, maybe we haven't explicitly mentioned this term about this inequality, but again, we are highlighting this theme as a cross-cutting theme. For example, when we talk about women's empowerment, this year we will be highlighting education, especially for the young girls. Education, especially in STEM, or for example, health. Again, this will also include this aspect of inequality. So again, perhaps in terms of a sort of specific, explicit agenda, we don't say equality, but that is firmly embedded across all the agenda that we have set. So I wanted to highlight that we are not negligent of that. If anything, that is parts and parcel of all the agenda that we have set. There was a reference to the question of anti-corruption that is not given the sort of deserved attention or weight in the working groups. In fact, that I don't think is the case. We have already had extensive discussion in the anti-corruption working group this year, and this year we will be highlighting very much on implementation, actually. And I think there has been quite a lot of initiatives and action plans already being discussed in past G20. So I think this year we will highlight that G20 should continue to lead by example for preventing and fighting corruption, by endorsing the high-level principles and good practices guide and exploring the ways to transform the past commitments to actual action. And at the same time, we remain committed to the adherence to the UN and OECD instruments and conventions. And I think these will continue to guide the activities of the G20 on the topic of anti-corruption. And also on the question of the health, perhaps I didn't mention it clearly in my opening remark, but that again is firmly embedded in the G20 discourse. Of course, Japan was one of the earliest proponents and sort of advocate of the importance of health. And this year we will highlight the sort of nexus of health and finance. And we believe that health is a prerequisite for growth. And USC will be the sort of front and center theme when we discuss health. But this year, I think the G20 will try to demonstrate a different paths to UHC based on their respective national context. So we no longer are at the stage of just sort of highlighting or emphasizing the importance of UHC. That is already given. So the question is how we sort of transform that sort of general commitment to actual national policy. And the key there is to bring in the sort of finance people into this discourse. So this year we will be supporting the UHC financing in developing countries, and we will be preparing the endorsement at the G20 Finance and Central Bank Governors meeting the critical importance of the nexus between the health and finance ministers. And that will be one of the key deliverables during the Japanese presidency. And on the climate, yes, we should not backtrack from the existing commitment. Well, you mentioned that 19 versus 1 would be better than backtracking. But of course, we do not want to see a sort of a crack or divide in the G20. So, of course, we will try to continue or reinforce our commitment to the Paris Agreement, but at the same time, we will try to highlight or to find a common base where all the G20 countries can work together constructively. And we think that energy transition and innovation would be the key concept in realizing that objective. And of course, financing is a key issue. This year, the Green Climate Fund will see the replenishment phase starting for the next cycle, and we hope that the G20 will provide an important important political impetus to give further push to that important replenishment process. And marine plastic, as I mentioned at the outset, this is going to be one of the key messages that we will send to the world. Not so much sort of penalizing the production, but to give awareness, heightened awareness about the need to manage the sort of the life cycle of plastic production all the way to the final sort of waste management. So the question is how to sort of sever the sort of flow from the plastic sort of production activity usage to prevent that from eventually sort of flowing into the marine environment. So that, I think, would be the area where we will be highlighting more about the sort of production cycle and waste management. This will be something new, which we hope will be a value addition in the G20 activities in terms of controlling marine plastic litter, contaminating the marine environment. I have taken note of the issues that have been raised, and we will make sure that the voices, the inputs will be properly reflected in the discussion of the Sherpas and eventually of the leaders' discussion. We think this is an ongoing process. This is not a one-shot event. So we would like to continue this dialogue to build up, and we will listen carefully, and I think it's important that all the stakeholders have their sort of voice reflected in the process. This is, after all, an open process. There's nothing that we hide. We very much appreciate the inputs, and I think this is how the G20 has developed to this size and magnitude. So we would like to continue this process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We are going to open it to the floor now. You heard with me, you heard with us, that we are looking in the same direction in terms of issues. And three things come out of what Mr. Gat just said. Three very important things. Stepping from past commitments to action, right? To concrete action. That's what I heard from you. And also making sure that we get from general commitments into national policies. Let's try to find how to do that. And no backtracking. Good. Now,
yes.
I will stop you because you are not on the panel.
Sure.
If you go more than 1 minute, you are done.
You have taken my seconds. Okay. My question, I don't know if it's the right platform or not, but a small question that I'm from a LGBT community as a trans person. I just want to know, is anybody or is any organization is the part of C20 or G20 as a steering committee or not? Till yet. Thank you.
Number 2.
Thank you very much. Good morning. My name is Loretta Wong from ACE Healthcare Foundation. I would like to take this opportunity to call for the G20 countries, particularly in the upcoming G20 summit, where prior to the meeting there will be ministers of finance and also ministers of health, that they will have a very first joint meeting together. And one thing that we really want to highlight, it is about domestic resource mobilization and also particularly on health financing. We are actually seeing, particularly in this year, quite a number of global health institutions, including the Global Fund. They are really doing a huge resource mobilization replenishment in this year. So on one hand, we really call for the G20 countries to step up their contributions to the Global Fund and also other global health institutions to make it successful. But at the same time, the countries really need to look into themselves inside, internally, that more resources needs to be allocated to address very complicated health issues in each country. So we see that a lot of countries, they can contribute a lot, they can mobilize a lot of resources into, for example, national defense. But the health of the population is as important as national defense. So therefore, we would like to see more G20 countries to contribute, allocate more resources internally to address the health issue, but also in support other global health institutes to have successful replenishment this year and also the next one. Thank you.
Number 3.
Troy, I'm a New Zealander who's a graduate student at the University of Tokyo. So my query is in sort of the climate change sphere, but I suppose it applies to all aspects of C20. I feel that there's a risk of fragmentation in the message that is being pushed to G20 states or states of any sort of international institution. A lot of civil society is saying, you know, we need to embrace the voice of the citizenry, and businesses or this commercial sector, they are only seeing climate change as an opportunity for profit. Others are like, we've got to collaborate with business, sort of balance things like that. Others are saying mitigation is the only way forward, adaptation is quitting. People are like, no, we've got to be realistic, adaptation works hand in hand with mitigation. So I'm sort of afraid almost that there's this lack of a sort of united front in the climate change sort of sphere when it comes to these big institutions and summits and such like. How does civil society feel about the fact that there's so many different messages that can potentially result in inaction from states as they don't get a clear message themselves? Thank you.
Thank you. Number 4.
Hello, I'm William van der Steeken from Soho. And I have a question. I just read the speech of Mr. Abe when he went to really go to the meeting of the Business 20. And he was saying, if we are successful in mass production of bioplastics that's dissolved in the sea, we will see significant improvement in the issue of plastic pollution. I think that's contradictory to what you said, where you're saying we'll avoid plastics to go, but probably you can comment. And my other question is that I see that the trade ministers are going to meet at the same time as the finance ministers, while the finance ministers have always been talking about trade issues, unfortunately, not talking about free trade of financial services. So how is free trade issues being combined with the financial issues? Because for the moment I don't see how that will be happening. And thirdly, Mr. Abe is also proposing that the WTO should govern the free flow of data. And, well, he said respecting, also respecting privacy, but can you explain how exactly, because the WTO doesn't have a kind of record of good governance? Thank you.
Thank you. Number 4. Would you mind, panelists, if we took another round before we come to the end? Okay, another round.
Thank you, Claire. I'm Wasai from China. My organization is China Association for International Cooperation. My question is, as we know, C20 has passed 6 years since its organization in 2013 from Russia. I'm wondering, each C20 have produced all the recommendations for G20. I want to know how we monitor the recommendations and implementation, because the implementation will at the national level. I want to ask our panelists, do you have any ideas and recommendations how to monitor the progress of the C20 community implementation at the national level? Thank you.
Number 6.
I'm Denison Jayasuriya from Malaysia. Very informative panel and session on various issues. But possibly Steve and others addressing through Oxfam issues of inequality. What we tend to hear is much of the isolation and marginalization of communities in poorer countries. But what about the voices of the marginalized, let's say from the US or even the UK, like Black Lives Matter and other groups that feel extremely marginalized in the process? And what voice would other countries or the region provide that provide comprehensively with SDG 10 and SDG 16 on discrimination and marginalization and effects of anti-policing, let's say in the US and so forth, and how does their voices come into this kind of discussion? And I think it's important because I don't see those kind of great, grievous issues, especially from many of the older democracies and in very strong market-driven societies that are marginalizing major sections of their community. How would G20 address those kind of concerns, especially in addressing SDG 10 and 16? Thank you.
Thank you, Number 7.
Hello, my name is Karen Gear. I'm from Amnesty International as well as the Gender Working Group of Civil 20. I wanted to thank you, Mr. Sukada, for talking about the importance of addressing inequality. But I also wanted to remind you that this needs to be deliberate and intersectional. We can't just talk about inequality and addressing it like it's really easy, because it isn't. And especially coming from the Gender Working Group, naturally you think that I'd be advocating for us to look at women, but we need to be much more nuanced and broader than that. We need to look at those who are most marginalised and most left behind, and that means that we need to work with civil society to prioritise the voices of those affected groups. This is particularly important in the context of the 25 by 25 commitment, and last year's declaration was great in that it reinforced that commitment and recognised that more needs to be done. We know that the gap is closing, but very slowly, not fast enough, and in some cases is widening. And so this is my appeal to you, Mr. Tsukada, to make sure that each country implements national implementation plans towards that commitment that focuses on decent work. We don't want just people getting into any old kind of work and perpetuate those inequalities within the labour market. And we want there to be a focus on intersectionality. Women with disabilities, widows, women living in rural areas, and so on, as well as LGBTQI people. So I just wanted to remind you about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Number 8.
Thank you very much. And I'm from China. We also value life education and mental health issues. China Life Care Association released the 2018 Young Quality of Life report, point out that 20% of teenagers have thought about suicide. In fact, all countries in the G20 face the challenge of youth suicide. The suicide rate of Americans is growing at an alarming rate, and has soared by 24% in the last 50 years, especially in the suicide rate of girls aged 10 to 14. And there are 14.2% suicides per 10 million inhabitants, and the highest suicide rate is young people. When suicide becomes the main problem, it also works as to fear the shortcomings of life education as soon as possible. We suggest that our countries should conduct special discussions on this issue, and the C20 can play a constructive role. Thank you very much.
Thank you, and then we take the very last one, that will be half a minute.
Thank you very much. I'm Zia from Pakistan Development Alliance. I was just reviewing the timelines of the G20 commitments and priority agendas, and I haven't seen peace and human security, the issues related to global terrorism and extremism rising across the world, what we have witnessed in New Zealand and yesterday in Sri Lanka. Is there any possibility of giving chance to peace on the priority agendas of the G20?
Thank you. These are our questions and comments. We'll come back now to the panel. I'm going to pick two of you, the respondents, Emilia and Enrique, to take any questions that were directed to the respondents. And then we're going to come back to Mr. Sadaka. Oh, thank you.
Okay. So I will start with the question about accountability and how we can track that the G20 is actually implementing their commitments. First of all, I do believe that G20 countries should be really transparent about this, because they're their commitments, not our commitments. And in many G20 working groups, we are seeing that we don't have any kind of accountability report from countries. In those working groups where we have is really very poor, and this is the case of the anti-corruption working groups, where it's very general, and in many cases it's not even published. So what we do as civil society, I work at Transparency International, we have been tracking the G20 high-level principle of beneficial ownership, which was adopted in 2014. We publish a report every 2 years where we assess all G20 countries on how well they are doing in implementing these commitments. And we have like this table where we see how countries are moving forward in the beneficial ownership implementation commitment. This is a way of doing it. It is not easy at all, because of course you need money, human resources, and that's why I strongly believe that G20 countries should move forward on accountability. And just something to clarify, I was not saying that the anti-corruption working group or the anti-corruption agenda is not important. What I was saying, I'm sorry if I was not clear enough, is that right now it's left in a silo, in the sense that it's not having any kind of effective dialogue with the rest of the G20 working groups. And let me show you a clear example about this. Last year, during the Argentinian presidency, we have this roadmap of infrastructure as an asset class, where there is no really mention about transparency, anti-corruption. And that's why, as civil society, we are asking to the G20 presidency to ensure that not only the anti-corruption working group, but all the G20 working groups have effective dialogue among themselves. So now you're going to have a ministerial meeting of health and finance. Why can't we think about having a joint session, I don't know, about the infrastructure and the anti-corruption working group, or even the international finance architecture working group system? I believe that you're going to talk about climate and marine.
Thank you. In terms of just to add to the example of environment, climate and energy, when it comes to tracking implementation, of course, climate change has its own UN convention, and most of the agreements have to be addressed there. Nevertheless, in the last couple of years, the Hamburg action plan on energy, climate and energy was developed, and this is something that serves as a roadmap to actually track progress. Last year in Buenos Aires, the G20 agreed on an adaptation action plan that is going to be implemented, and the Japan presidency is taking it forward. In addition to that, last year, the G20 countries had a compilation of progress or good practices more than progress in terms of one of the issues under the climate commitments, which is long-term strategies. And just to take on the climate question about being united or being fragmented, yes, it's actually the problem of our movement about how many things we have to cover and how many messages. And it's a big challenge, but we have to be up for the task. The thing is, like I said before, climate is not an environmental issue anymore. It has to do with economy, it has to do with development, it has to do with inequality, it has to do with impacts, it has to do with many sectors in our societies, and that is why there are so many messages. Of course, and the one thing that, at least I think it's a nice lesson from the climate movement, is that it's not one message that is the most important or the first one. All messages are equally important, whether that is gender and climate, whether that is mitigation, adaptation. The problem comes when you actually start saying, oh, first let's mitigate, or first let's adapt. We need to tackle every single part of the problem. And finally, of course, the root of climate change is about emissions. So it's key to bring down emissions seriously with not foul solutions. That is key. But at the same time, the climate is going to continue changing. That's no question about that. So we need to adapt anyway. And that's why it's so important. The G20, that accounts for 80% of the global emissions, has to take the lead in this. Collectively, they are responsible for more than 2/3 of the responsibility. So this is why they need to actually lead and help others and making sure that their problem is addressed properly.
Thank you, Enrique.
Now we come back to
there were quite a few comments, and I hope I will cover most, if not all. But still, I have taken note of them, so I will make sure that these will be properly addressed in our discussions in the coming weeks. First, on the question of finance and health intersection. Yes, you're right that we have started to realize the importance of domestic resource mobilization, along with the our continuous stride efforts to step up contribution to international support for various funds, including the Global Fund. And this is precisely the reason why we have called upon both the health ministers and finance ministers to get together. That is the need for internal prioritization of the health needs. And we have tried to highlight the importance of this issue of domestic resource mobilization. And I think this is related, so something which has been long awaited. But we hope that through the G20 encouragement, this will be given more recognition and importance in the health discourse. And the next concerns the climate fragmentation. You have characterized it, but I have a slightly different view about this, because I think people tend to have a false sense that everything is unraveling, but in fact that is not the case. Last year we have agreed on the new rule book at the COP24, which the process of which I happen to be a part of. And I think it's important that we have this sort of implementing program with us. Of course, one of the big players is not part of this, but at least we have the sort of legally binding implementing rulebook with us. So I think it's important that we continue to build on what we have agreed in COP24 for the next 2020 post-2020 phase to implement the Paris Agreement. So I don't think there is a lack of united front. If anything, we have the rule with us, which everybody has signed up. On the plastic, marine plastic litter question, perhaps I didn't make myself clear enough, but the idea that Prime Minister Abe is proposing is to highlight more on the sort of recycling and waste management aspect of the value chain of plastic products. Not so much penalizing the production part, but to address the question of how we can prevent these products from flowing into the marine ecosystem. So that, I think, is the question of highlighting or giving more emphasis to the sort of product cycle and waste management instead of just trying to stop production of plastic. That is the sort of priority or highlight that we try to give in this discussion. On the trade question, of course, trade is not the main issue of finance ministers. It's dealt with properly within the trade and digital ministers track this year. This question of trade is kind of overshadowing the prospect for growth in the coming years. So I think the biggest challenge or the biggest task for us this year is to agree on a solid commitment to fight against protectionism in all its forms, including unfair trade practices, and also to reaffirm our commitment to the rules-based multilateral trading system, which we failed in the past few G20. So that is the top priority for the presidency this year on the trade agenda. On the digital economy, Prime Minister is highlighting the importance of strengthening trust in the digital economy by addressing the question of highlighting this theme of data free flow with trust. Of course, free flow of data is important, but at the same time, we need to reconcile this with the need to ensure consumer protection and also privacy and also security. So I think the question is to what extent we or how we balance these public policy interests with the need to promote free flow of data. And this year, the presidency wishes to encourage high-level discussion, international discussion on this general theme of data governance. But at the same time, there is also a discussion already initiated in the WTO, which is the question of e-commerce, rulemaking in the e-commerce. And the idea is that G20 would like to give political impetus to encourage this process, which just started in Geneva, the question of e-commerce rulemaking. So these two are slightly different, but are related under the broad sort of umbrella of digital governance. So that is how we interpret this question. And the question of monitoring the importance of keeping track of past commitments in G20 and how. Yes, that is a valid point. In fact, for example, in the development stream, OECD has been sort of monitoring the progress of G20 countries in this area, and they have been annually producing a sort of checklist or record of progress of G20 countries. So there are attempts, efforts to sort of keep track of how well countries are doing on their past commitments, and I think we need to broaden or expand this exercise in other areas as well. And what we are trying to introduce this year is to do the same in the women's agenda. Not just Brisbane 25 by 25, but on other aspects or indicators, we wish to find some kind of formula where we can sort of monitor progress of how well we are doing in the women's empowerment area. Yes, I take note of your comment about anti-corruption. I think we need to do more on this, and we will try to live up to that expectation. And finally, on the question of the agenda of extremism or peace or political issue in general, I think that, as I mentioned at the outset, G20 is more a forum for international economic cooperation. And there is a consensus, I think, among the G20 members that we will not go into the political agenda. There are other places, for example, the United Nations, which can more sort of legitimately address these questions. So I don't think this will be a topic which will be discussed in this or future G20 meetings. And I'm sorry if I didn't cover all of the questions, but I have taken note, and I think this is a continuous process, so we really welcome and appreciate any inputs or opinions that you wish to be reflected in the process.
Thank you very, very much, President Takada. Thank you also for your clarity, because that clarity makes us get the takeaway, which is simple. From past commitments to actions through national policy. Takeaway. Can you give a hand to that takeaway? Give a hand to that takeaway. Past commitments, we're going to get into action through national policies. That's what we heard from the government of Japan. Japan is going to push for that. Japan is going to invite other leaders to push for that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. End of session.
Yes. You now have another colleague representing Japan.
Human Rights United Nations, and unfortunately he couldn't come, but instead he agreed to give a video message. And I would like to ask Kaori to explain why digital human rights is important with the issue of G20.
Hi, so good morning again. I will introduce the page and also the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. I believe many of you already know, but just I'm going to talk a little bit about the guiding principles. So UN guiding principles are a set of guidelines for states and corporations to prevent, address and remedy human rights abuses committed in business operations. So therefore the guiding principles are very, very important and relevant to all the economic and financial activities. And then the guiding principles, UN guiding principles on business and human rights are supposed to implement, I know that to implement to the United Nations, protect, respect and remedy, the framework. So these guiding principles were unanimously endorsed in 2011. So let me just explain a bit the three pillars of the guiding principles of business and human rights. The first one is the state has a duty to protect the human rights. And the second, the corporate has a responsibility to respect the human rights. And third, anyone who is a victim of human rights abuses has to have easy access to remedy. So states, all states are expected to ensure protection of respect to human rights. The aspect of state duty to protect human rights covers policy areas such as management of state-owned enterprises, export credit, and official investment insurance, public procurement, and so on. And the states are expected to ensure policy coherence between government departments and agencies that shape business practice and the state's international human rights obligation. And the second pillar for the corporations, in order for them to respect the human rights, corporations are required to exercise human rights due diligence to identify, to prevent, mitigate, and account for how they address impacts on human rights. And third, the remedy, which is very, very important. And UN guiding principles envisage the three types of mechanisms to provide effective remedy in business-related human rights abuses. And one is state-based judicial mechanisms. The second one is state-based non-judicial mechanisms. And the third one is non-state-based grievance mechanisms. So, and then let me introduce Dante Page, who sits in the middle. And actually, the UN, the working group, the working group on the issue of human rights and transnational corporations and the business enterprises, also referred to as a working group on business and human rights, was established, by the Human Rights Council in 2011. So then, as you can see, the group is composed of 5 independent experts of balanced geographic representatives, and 5 people from the 5 different continents. So their mandates include to promote the effective and comprehensive dissemination and implementation of the guiding principles of business and human rights, and also that they do a lot of things. And now every country is asked to develop a national action plan to implement the guiding principles, and in Japan is now developing one. So the working group have also a mandate to help the nations develop the national action plan as well. Okay, and on a personal note, I met Dante Page in 2007 when we were working together in the working group to develop ISO 26000 for social responsibility. So now here's Dante. Okay?
Member of the UN Working Group of Business and Human Rights. I regret the fact that it was not possible for me to be in Tokyo right now, but as you know, I live in Chile, South America. It's a very, very long way to get there, so my apologies. In any case, I would like to send you a message. First of all, thank you for the invitation, and all members of the working group are always open to engage with civil society organizations, especially on civil society meetings that take place in the context of G20 meetings for years. We try to engage with the governments organizing the G20 events in order to make sure that there is consistency over the years after some very significant and positive declarations that have come out of previous G20 years, especially the German one, and hopefully this year we'll be able to come out with something similar to that, at least to get some sort of continuity on previous declarations regarding supply chain or the development of national action plans or the work on business and human rights. Regarding what we do as a working group, our priorities, and as you know well, is to get the guiding principles to be used around the world and pushing governments to set up their expectations regarding business and human rights or corporate behavior regarding human rights. That is something that is starting to pick up. It's something that is being turned into national action plans in 20 and a bit more countries, and some are in process, including Japan. And we look forward for looking into more action plans to be published and to be implemented. Our current work, if you're aware of some of the work done before, like human rights due diligence, cross-border collaboration, we're right now working on a report on business and human rights regarding gender lens, and also a report on business and human rights in the context of conflict or post-conflict countries. And this year's report to the General Assembly in October is on policy coherence. Our assessment is that we're making some progress, at least we're speeding up a little bit regarding the corporate, the pillar 2 of the guiding principle, the corporate respect to human rights. But we are not doing enough progress on pillar 1. States have been moving in the direction of setting expectations, but for a large extent, they are not fulfilling our expectation regarding policy coherence and leading by example. And those two elements are going to be central to the 2019 Forum on Business and Human Rights, and we would like to elaborate more on those topics. For the minimum, we would like you to engage with us, participate again in the forum, and hopefully be able to participate in the regional consultations that will take place in June in Bangkok, with the aim to learn from each other and to stimulate regional races to the top, lessons and learnings that take place at the regional level that can be plugged into the forum in Geneva. We need, for all purposes, is engagement of civil society from the angles of business and human rights defenders, but also from the angle of advocacy groups, fact-finding groups, research groups that can provide data, that can provide evidence, that can help all of us build a wide coalition between governments, business, and civil society that can push the business and human rights agenda forward. We look forward to engaging with you. Congratulations on your forum. If you can report back to us regarding what can we do together to engage forward, that would be really, really good. And looking forward to seeing you in Bangkok, hopefully Geneva again. And as always, please count on us as much as you need, because we're always there for you. I will be, as you well know, in Japan in June, and in that context, of course, I will find all the time needed to engage with you face-to-face and Tokyo. Thank you very much again.
It took about 30 hours to get here, so this time keep them count. But let me explain a little bit some of the important points he explained in the video so that we can better understand what he's trying to say. But before I forget, we created a working group called Labor, Business and Human Rights. So there's some input from the working group members. So actually, it's very good, did you explain a little bit? Okay. So I just try not to forget about their contribution to make this positive paper on business and human rights. And business sector is very, very important and very powerful sectors to work together for civil society to tackle economic issues, social issues. That's true. But at the same time, business could be detrimental to human rights violation, environment, and sometimes, of course. For example, according to the NGO Global Justice Now in 2017 figures, if you take a look at the top 100 entities, including companies and states, 61 out of 100 are companies. Only 31 out of 100 is states. It's so powerful, influential in the economy from the business sector. For example, Walmart is bigger than Spain, believe it or not. China National Petroleum is bigger than South Korea. Royal Dutch Shell is Mexico, bigger than Mexico. Toyota is bigger than Russia. Apple is bigger than Norway. This is reality calculated by the NGO who has been very giving dependable information. So human rights violations do not always come from the states, but often the cases from the business. And that's why BHR, Business and Human Rights, has been focused in the global arena, especially the last 20 years or so. And for example, UN Global Compact was created in 2000. I'm a board member of the Global Compact Network Japan here in Tokyo. And also, the biggest achievement was the guiding principle on the business and human rights, which was adopted in 2011. How we just explained. Now, guiding principle is now the most powerful and driving tool of protecting human rights in business. And as Dante said, UN Working Group has engaged with G20, especially G20 host country, pushing G20 to implement GPS, including human rights due diligence in the supply chain and keep consistency of those policies. And strong commitment has been made as an outcome of G20 summit. For example, like Dante said, 2017 German G20 declaration. And for example, establish adequate policy frameworks such as National Action Plan on BHR and exercise human rights due diligence. Eliminate child labor by 2025, forced labor, human trafficking, and all forms of modern slavery, such and such. So strong commitment made in Germany in 2017. So again, this commitment has to be implemented, not just a declaration up in the air, but has to be taken concrete action. Policy coherence of business human rights will be reported to the United Nations Assembly 2019 this year, just like Dante said. And there are pillar 3 of the guiding principle on business human rights. But he mentioned that there's some progress on pillar 2, which is cooperation. But so behind, pillar 1, states has not been doing well enough. And he said, they are not fulfilling our expectation. So, Pillar 1 state duty will be focused this year at the UN Business and Human Rights Forum, which is the biggest forum in Geneva in November. Some of you have been attended this forum. It's very, very interesting. So, working group observed in Pillar 1, then again, State Building will be focused on the UN Forum on Business Human Rights, and says keyword, governments must step up their action and leadership. And there will be a regional consultation program in Bangkok in June this year. So, civil society should work on BS human rights with business sectors to prevent from human rights violations, make sure that the effective remedies are available for affected people. This year, business human rights has not been much focused within G20 discussions, assuming that there have been enough commitments already on business human rights. I think now is the time to implement those commitments already in the past, made in past G20 summits. Thank you very much. This is the end of the session. Thank you.